StoryHinge, Episode 84. Elaine Bennett. Speechwriting and Stories.
But if you start out with a story that's going to tie in somehow to the content of your speech or whatever you're writing, then you draw people into the story with you, and they are more likely to stay with you as you make the transition to what you might think of as the real stuff that you're there to talk about. If you know the feeling that you want the audience to have when you're done with your speech, start with that, and then see if you can find something that ties into that emotion or that theme.
Welcome to StoryHinge. At StoryHinge, we explore foundational ideas and beliefs. We believe everyone has a beautiful story to grow. Now here's your host, Jason Vidaurri.
All right, welcome to StoryHinge. Hope you are having a great day out there. Today we're going to be spending time with Elaine Bennett. Elaine has been a speechwriter for many years and has some stories around that. And really, we're going to talk about the interplay of story and speeches or talks that you give and how crucial that is. Elaine is also a writing coach and offers a service to help us all become better writers. So without further ado, let's get on with the show. All right, so excited today here on StoryHinge. I want to welcome Elaine Bennett.
Hi, Jason.
Yeah, I'm really excited to talk to you, and I'm looking forward to this conversation about story and some of your experience. I know you've had some experience in that throughout your career. And so why don't you take us back a little bit, Elaine, and let us hear some of the, I guess, moments and situations leading up to your writing and getting into story itself.
Okay, well, I was a theater major at college. So naturally, I ended up writing speeches for the CEO of a Wall Street firm.
Oh.
Because isn't that what you do with a theater major? But I was working. I was doing a little consulting at Salomon Brothers, and they kept keeping me because they liked me, and they kept offering me jobs, and I kept saying no because I was a theater major. Then they said, our CEO is going to go out and do some public speaking, and he needs a speechwriter. Do you know how to write a speech? Now, in the 10 seconds that I processed that question, I realized that A, that's not the kind of question somebody's going to ask you twice. To start out as a speechwriter for the CEO.
Yeah.
And B, while I had never written a speech, I had taken a semester of playwriting in my theater classes, and you write monologues, so I did know how to write for the ear rather than for the reader. And I figured that skill was the main one that you need when you write a speech. So I said, sure, I know how to write a speech. And I became the CEO's speechwriter.
Ah, this is right at the beginning of your career.
That was right at it wasn't like right out of college. I was a couple of years out of college.
Okay.
But yeah, it was, I hadn't quite found my niche yet. And I was, doing some book editing and some other things. And I hadn't really found the thing. Speechwriting turned out to be the thing.
Okay. And how did that go? I mean, that sounds like you jumped into it, and how did that work out?
Yeah, I jumped into it. Fortunately, my boss was the kind of person who he realized that you could, I used to tell this story quite differently, but now that I am also a speechwriter and a writing coach, every time I start to tell the story, I want to stop and say, is this really the best way to position it? But anyway, my boss's idea was that you could teach somebody about, the intricacies of Wall Street, but you can't teach somebody how to write a good sentence. Now, I disagree with that from my position as a writing coach, but back then I was really glad that he recognized that, that writing well is a valuable skill, and the content can come later. And so they set me up with a wonderful partner who was, a partner of the firm. They set me up with a wonderful guy who understood writing in it, but also, was a great teacher about the finance aspect of it. And so for the first year or so, I wrote with him, and then they took the training wheels off, and I was up and running on my own.
Okay. I guess I'm curious to hear, maybe an experience in that, in writing for a CEO and what that might have been like.
Well, it was interesting because I learned the way it can go well and the way it cannot go well. And I learned to take my ego out of it, right? So one of the first speeches I wrote for him, the partner helping me and I went down to his office, and we sat there, and he told us what he wanted to say. We said, the topic is this, and he said, okay, I want to say these things. And I wrote them all down on my legal pad very fast. And then I went back upstairs and I wrote the speech, and I wrote exactly what he said he wanted to say. And so a couple days later, we sent the speech to him. A couple days later, we go down to see him, and he says, well, that's not what I want to say. You wrote ABC. I want to say XYZ. And then he came up with something completely different that he had not said in the first meeting, but he had decided that this was what he wanted to say. And so that's when I realized that it wasn't about me, because I had written exactly what he had said. It was about, sometimes some people need something to bat off of, right? They need to see it in writing before they get their minds going correctly. And so I really am pretty ego free when I'm writing for my clients. If they want to take something in a direction that I think is not helpful, I will tell them that. And I have, in fact, turned down work when I thought it would be detrimental to the client to do what he wanted to do. But if they insist, no, I really want to say it that way, it's your speech, I'll go ahead.
Well, that's interesting. Yeah, you're right. You remind me of talking about executives or CEOs. I had just some of my dealings with some is I've had that happen before, where they came and said, well, this actually being in a meeting with multiple people, and they gave us a direction, and we all went towards that direction. I said, why are you guys doing this? We're like, that's the direction you gave. And there's, I think in one situation, there's like 5 of us that testified that, yeah, that's exactly what you said. And the executive's like, no, that's not what I said.
Yeah.
Just right against all the witnesses. No, you guys are all wrong. This is not what I said. So I guess I've been in those type of situations. So, after that, where did that go?
Well, so I wrote for the CEO for a couple of years, 2 or 3 years. And in my spare time, we had in the office a complete set of Warren Buffett's annual reports. And I knew that, Warren Buffett was considered one of the best writers in the business world. And I figured if I was going to be a business writer, I should learn to be one of the best. So I started reading all of his annual report letters. And he is a great storyteller. And that's what you need to be, especially if you're conveying something that can be as boring as business stuff. I mean, he's got insurance. He's got an insurance company. Forgive me if any of your listeners work for an insurance company, but actually if they do, because I have written for insurance companies, they probably understand how difficult it can be to make some of that stuff interesting. So I spent time, whenever I had a free minute, I would read some of Warren's annuals. And then one day in the summer of 1991, the company almost went out of business because some people had done something very bad, and the SEC was highly upset. And so we said, wait. Our largest shareholder has agreed to come in and be the interim CEO. Would that be okay? And the SEC said, well, since your largest shareholder is Warren Buffett, and he has an impeccable reputation. Yes, that we'll give you some rope and see if you can turn yourselves around. And so just like that, in the space of a day, I became, I was still the CEO speechwriter, but now the CEO was Warren Buffett.
Well, that's wild.
And so I was sitting they had a big press conference on a Sunday to introduce him, and I was sitting back there taking notes, and somebody tapped me on the shoulder and said, "You got to go upstairs and write something." So I went upstairs, and they wanted me to write a letter that Warren was going to send to all of our clients saying basically, oops, and it won't happen again. And so I wrote this letter, and I didn't know who was going to be reviewing it because other than my immediate boss, everybody else had been fired. So I decided that I was going to, and this was in the early 90s, right? So no email. So I decided that I was going to write my name like a school paper. I wrote my name and my office phone number at the top of the paper, and I sent it out into the world. And the next day my phone rang. "Elaine, this is Warren Buffett." I'm like, hello. He says, "Did you write this thing?" I said, "Yes, sir, I did." And he said, "It sounds like I wrote it." And I said, "Well, sir, that's my job."
Huh.
And I had absorbed, Warren has a very unique voice, and I had absorbed it through those weeks of reading his annual reports. So when I was called to not speak like Warren Buffett, but write like Warren Buffett, I was able to do that.
Wow. And did you do that consciously? You're trying to adapt his voice, or I guess that seems like quite a skill to be able to do that.
Well, it is. It is a skill, and I'm not quite sure where I got it. But yeah, it's not quite conscious, but it's not unconscious. I had his voice in my memory bank, and then it came out of my fingers. It's something that I've always had the ability to do, and the story of how I realized it is actually very embarrassing. But I can tell it if you like. I will embarrass myself in front of your listeners.
Yeah, let's hear it.
I was in college. They did a production of The Three Sisters, Chekhov's play. The director had cast it, with the best people he could find. And so the oldest sister was a white woman. The middle sister was a beautiful black woman from the islands. And the youngest sister was a Chinese American woman with family in China. And she had quite a thick Chinese accent that apparently she'd been working to get rid of during rehearsals, but then a family member died and she had to go back to China, and the accent came back with her. And so The Three Sisters is a very long play. It's about 3 hours long, and about an hour per sister. And so I sat there for 3 hours listening to this woman speak English in a very heavy Chinese accent. Stuff like, and please forgive me, this is part of the embarrassing part. "Oh, let's go to Moscow." And so my friend and I left the theater at the end of the show, and she turned to me and she said, "How did you like the play?" And my brain wanted to say it was all right, but what came out of my mouth was, "Oh, it was all right." And I was like, "Oh my God, did I just say that out loud? That's horrible." And it was completely unintentional, but I'd been listening to that accent. And so when I became a speechwriter years later, I realized that there must be a part of my brain that just soaks up voices. And that while it was a horrible thing when it first came out, and I certainly didn't do it on purpose, but when I call on it to do it on purpose, it's a blessing for me as a speechwriter. And so when I have a new client, I try hard to interview them on the phone so that I can type what they say. And because of an entry level job that I had years and years ago, I can type pretty much as fast as anybody can speak. And so I get to type their stuff verbatim, and I could record it and send it away to a transcription service, but there's something about the physical act of getting their voice in my fingers and from my fingers to my brain that I think is what helps me to write to write speeches in the style of whoever I'm writing for.
Well, that sounds cool. Now I have to ask you, is there a story or anything to talk about in spending time or writing for Warren Buffett before we move on to talking about the story itself?
Well, he didn't give a lot of external speech. He didn't give any external speeches while he was there, because he was focused on getting the company back in shape, and he wanted to, show that he was serious about it, which he was. But I learned a lot about just sort of positioning and optics, and I don't know quite how to describe smart negotiation. So he's a wonderful guy. Has obviously about the annual meeting he has, and he has yes.
So you had some experiences there. So after that, where did he go? And maybe we take a turn here and dive into where does story fit into this, into that communication of a speech, or I guess even maybe in a presentation. Where does that fit in that you've seen in your career?
Well, if you want to have a speech or a presentation, even a PowerPoint, if you want to do it without story, you better have some really loud music or be yelling at the audience because they're going to fall asleep. So story is the way we take in information. If you give people information without a story, guess what? They're going to make a story around that information because that's how they store it in their brains. So you have to tell a story, and it's better to, tell your story your own way than to have them take the information and fit it into their own story. So you need to tell a story to connect with the audience, to make your information, your points memorable. If you try and skip the story part, you're not going to be memorable. You might as well just stand up in front of the audience and be like Charlie Brown's mother for half an hour going, wow, 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 because that's what they're going to hear.
Yeah. And maybe we'll step back and ask you, what are the elements of the story that you've seen? The word story has been used pretty broadly recently. We talk, everything's a story just about. But I suspect there's probably some more refinement in your view and what is the effective story within speeches.
Well, there's a really cool TED Talk, and I'll put it on my page for your listeners, because of course I forgot to look up the name of the scientist who gave it. But he's a neuroscientist, and he did some experiments where he put people in functional MRI machines and told a story. What happened was that the MRI, the readouts for the people listening to the story synced up. So as the story went on, they were having the same brainwave patterns. And he was having the same brainwave patterns as he told the story. And then they took it to a next generation, and they had the people who were listening to the story tell the story to other people. And that second audience, their brainwave patterns synced up as well. So there's something that's really primal about hearing and telling stories that just brings us together when we don't even realize it. And so if you are wanting to get people to take action, if you're wanting to bring people together, telling a story is the best way to do it, because they are coming together without even realizing it. Their brainwaves are coming together. So that's one thing. Now, what a story is, I'm sure you've heard of the book Make It Stick by Chip and Dan Heath.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they have a great mnemonic for story, which is success. And having said that it's a great mnemonic, Can I remember what success stands for? So it's
Yeah, here it is right here. Well, I'll lay this out because I think it's valuable. It's they're simple. So that's your first simple. They're unexpected. They're concrete. They're credible. They're emotional, and they
emotional.
told as stories.
Yeah, yeah. So emotional is the part, if you're going to tell a story, emotion is generally the part that business people like to leave out because, I mean, it's changing now, but back when I first started telling stories, the men were more macho and, emotional is not, it's not about emotion. It's about selling things.
Yeah.
Um, you start out, if you start out with a story, obviously it has to be a story that connects with the message that you're telling, because you can't just, people have managed to remember the old start your story with a joke. Well, you can't just say a duck walks into a bar unless you're going to be speaking about ducks or bars. But it has to be, every word of what you're saying has to relate to the topic that you're speaking about, because otherwise you're just wasting everybody's time.
Hmm.
But if you start out with a story that's going to tie in somehow to the content of your speech or whatever you're writing, then you draw people into the story with you, and they are more likely to stay with you as you make the transition to what you might think of as the real stuff that you're there to talk about. So I always start out with a story, and I know you were saying that you're in the chemistry, you worked
Yeah.
as a chemist. Yeah.
Chemical engineer. Yeah.
Yeah. So I had to write a speech for someone who was going to be delivering it to an audience of chemists and scientists. And that's not the kind of audience that this person usually speaks to. So they were a little bit worried about, being scientific enough and being, what they thought of as the chemical scientist kind of personality, sort of cut and dried. And so I wrote a speech. I wrote a story at the beginning of the speech to get everybody on the same page and get everybody relating. And my speaker cut it. I found out later.
Hmm.
Just cut the whole story and cut right to the chase. And I was just like, why don't you understand that the story is the most important part of the speech? It's not excess words. It's the thing that you need to say to get everybody involved with you. Another thing, I wrote something, or somebody sent me a draft outline of speech that she wanted me to write, and at the top it said optional introduction goes here, and I just wanted to bang my head against the wall. And I wrote her back and I said, if you want to break a speechwriter's heart, just write optional introduction, because the speech that I will give you will have its own introduction, and if you put like a hat on top of that, it's like putting a hat on a pig. The pig doesn't need a hat.
Yeah, that's good.
It's perfect, just the way it is in all of its pigness. Let's think of something prettier. It's like putting a hat on the statue of David, right? You go to Florence, you look in the square, there's David, and he's gorgeous with all of his muscles defined, and then somebody put a straw hat on it. You're like, what?
As I'm thinking about this, and how do you find story? And I'm thinking some of the technical stuff I have to present at times, or things that maybe not initially feel like there's a story to be told with it. How would you go about finding one for that kind of topic?
Well, it doesn't have to be exactly about chemicals or the what you're talking about. If you know the feeling that you want the audience to have when you're done with your speech, start with that. And then see if you can find something that ties into that emotion or that theme. And I like to teach people about going on story safari. That's a phrase I made up, and it's looking at the world through a different lens, right? You go outside and you see the birds on the lawn and you're like, oh, there's birds on the lawn. Okay, I've got to go do my groceries. But if you go outside and you see the birds on the lawn and they're like pecking frantically because there's not enough food for them, then that's maybe a story that you can use in a speech. Or if you're so my favorite example of this, actually I didn't even have to leave my house for it, but I had to write a promo copy for a speech that I hadn't yet written. And I wasn't going to need to write the speech for another 3 months, but the organizers wanted a promo copy about it. And I was like, I hate that. I hate that. So I'm sitting there and I'm trying to think about what I'm going to feel like writing about in 3 months, what my speaker's going to want to talk about in 3 months. And this song popped into my head from The Sound of Music. How do you solve a problem like Maria? I'm like, go away. I'm trying to write. And so I sat thinking for a little while longer, and the song came back. I'm like, I don't have time for this now. And the third time the song came back, I realized it wasn't an interruption. It was my speech. And so my guy was speaking on a conference about women in business. And I wrote a speech that used the plot of The Sound of Music in the first 5 minutes of the speech. It used the plot of The Sound of Music kind of like a business school case study. And so he talked about this young woman, let's call her Maria, and she's very unhappy with her job, and she, doesn't want to work the hours that they want to work, and she doesn't want to do things the same way all the time, and her coworkers and her superiors are very frustrated with her, and sometimes she just slips out of work altogether, and she runs up to the nearest mountain, twirls her skirts, and sings, because Maria is the protagonist of The Sound of Music. That was exactly the problem. Oh, and that her people thought that Maria was an oddball, but actually she was a leader, and they just didn't recognize her leadership skills. And that's a lot of what business has done, still does with women, is not recognize the unique qualities that each person brings, not just women, but it's easier, I think, for men to be unique. The unique qualities that women bring that actually will make them leaders in a different way, but in an equally productive way. So that was that idea. But I just look for I look for stories everywhere. I was at a baseball game last summer. I was at a Phillies game. I'm trying to go see a game in all of the ballparks in North America.
Okay.
And so I was sitting there behind home plate, and this woman came in late, and she had a little cotton Phillies hat, like a bucket hat. And every time somebody hit a foul ball, she leapt into the air and waved her cotton hat as if she was going to catch the ball in her hat. And she was very disappointed when she never did, because she didn't understand the laws of physics, that when you're sitting behind home plate, there's a foul screen. And unless it goes straight up and comes straight down, you're not going to catch a ball. So when I got back to the hotel, I was like, well, that was a story safari, because that was, I could write about that story as a case study in optimism, or as a case study in not understanding your milieu, where you are in the world. Or several other ways I could use that story. So that's the kind of thing that I look for wherever I am, and I think it's a speechwritery kind of way of looking at the world. But people can learn it, and I in fact teach it.
No, that's good. It's like looking for that story everywhere. And one thing I started doing with my kids more is a couple things. One is to ask them about their day in terms of what was something funny that happened, or trying to get some story out of them so they recognize those things throughout the day, because I think they do happen to us, but if we're so caught up in our own little world, we miss it.
Exactly. And what did you do today? We'll get nothing.
Yeah. How was your day? All right.
It's fine.
Sometimes I have to prod, and it's like, well, tell me something funny that happened. Nothing funny happened. Come on, there had to be something funny. And but if you prod a little bit, we do find stuff. So that's good. So Elaine, I guess what is I want to bring us up to what your work is today, and where can people connect with you?
Oh, sure. So Today I am at Bennett Inc. BENNETTINK.com. And I actually have a special page for your listeners. They'll find it in your show notes, but it's bennettinc.com/storyhinge. And I've got a special gift for them, which is a book on an ebook that I wrote on courageous communications. It's called Do It Anyway, because everybody's scared of writing. You just need to do it anyway. And I also have a larger ebook on storytelling. It's called What's the Story? So your listeners might be interested in that. I'll put a link for that on my page too. But what I'm doing is I'm still writing for executives, and I'm about to start ghostwriting a book, actually, which is pretty exciting. I'm writing a TED Talk for somebody right now, but I also am a teacher, as I mentioned, and so I have writing webinars that people can take a look at. I don't know when this podcast will air, but I'm doing a special Story Safari summer camp this summer, and that will be virtual. That'll be a 6-week long scavenger hunt, basically. And I've got a Story Safari field trip in real life to the Getty Center in LA in late August. So that will be lots of fun. We'll get a tour of the Getty, and we'll look for the stories that we can find there and talk about them and stuff like that. So and in the fall, I'll be starting up my Writing Unbound program, which is a 10-week long program to help you learn. It's actually, we talk about the success mnemonic and Chip and Dan Heath quite a lot. And so you learn the basics of storytelling and story arc and some of the things that you should do and maybe don't want to do.
Okay, that sounds great. It sounds like you have a whole lot going on there.
I do.
Yeah. Before we part here, I want to make sure we hit, is there something we've missed that you might want to share with us that we didn't dive into deep enough yet?
Well, the most important thing about writing is to do it. So if you feel that you're not a good enough writer, you need to start writing. And because the only people who don't write well are people who don't write. You're not going to write like Hemingway every time. But the more bad words you write, the closer you are to writing good words. So I write every day, and I have for over 2 years now. I think I'm at 770, something like that today. I didn't check this morning, but just for 15 minutes, if you just write for 15 minutes every day, you will get better over time. And when I started this, I was already an award-winning speechwriter, but I can definitely see how my writing has improved over the past 2 years. So that's, and I run every quarter, I run a 5-day writing challenge. So, get on my mailing list and I will tell you about when the next one's coming up. Okay.
And in that everyday writing, is there any tips on that, or you just write anything, or certain formats to go by, or?
The first thing is to write. And to spend the 15 minutes writing, not thinking about what you're going to write. So I recommend that people just make a list when they get an idea of something they'd like to write. Just write it down on a list. And then when you start your 15 minutes, you can look at your list if you don't have an idea that pops into your head right away. And yeah, sure, mix it up. If you are a serious writer, write something funny. Write a poem one day, or make it a poetry week. I like to switch up creativity. Last year I took an art class for a week, just because I don't think of myself as an artist, but I wanted to give that art part of my brain a little exercise. And so but in terms of writing, write whatever some days I just count journaling because it's I've left it till the end of the day and I'm exhausted. But most days it's and it's not, I don't count writing for my clients. It's writing for me.
That's good. Well, that's excellent. Elaine, this has been very enjoyable to speak with you and to hear some of these thoughts. And I feel inspired to do a little bit more writing. I try to do pretty good on that. I've had that goal of 15 minutes a day. I can't say I've done it greatly at this point yet, but I'm inspired to try that again. So thank you for that.
keep track of what I have an app on my iPhone called Streaks. And that has enabled me to keep track of my writing. And I, once you get to a certain milestone, you're like, oh man, I better write today. I don't want to break the streak. So
that's good. That's good. And I actually started doing this also with it's kind of an off topic here, but with guitar playing. I used to play guitar just a little bit back in high school and college, and I hadn't played for 20 some years or whatever. And I go, you know what? I still like the concept of kind of like you exercising a different part of my brain.
Yeah.
Let me play with the musical side. And I told myself, well, I'm only going to commit 5 minutes a day. If I get 5 minutes, that's all I'm going to do. And it's worked out for me. So maybe I need to say, if I get 5 minutes of writing, I think I can commit to that, and then let it turn into 15 minutes on its own.
That's right. I mean, I some people have a word count, but I prefer the time limit because it could take you all day to write 100 words if you're not in the place where you're writing. So, and I tell people, if they don't know what to write, just sit there and write, I have no idea what to write, until they're sick of writing that, and then something else will come.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Elaine, thank you so much for spending time with us here on StoryHinge, and wish you the best, and we'll have those links for people to be able to connect with you.
All right. Well, great talking to you, Jason.
All right. Thank you all for spending time with us. Thank you again to Elaine for being here with us on StoryHinge. Again, if you want to connect with her, you can find her at bennettinc.com, BENNETTINK.com, or the special link for us here at StoryHinge is bennettinc.com/story-hinge. And those will be in the show notes and on the website if you want to see those links. Few ideas here before we close out. And I guess on my side, a couple takeaways and thoughts from this discussion. I like the success acronym that we got from Make It Stick, or Built to Stick, the name of that book, whatever that name is. But simple, unexpected, concrete, credible, emotional, and story-based. And as you all know, I'm a great fan of stories. I think they're probably the most powerful way to communicate. Certainly the most memorable way that we remember things, and especially in talks and presentations that we receive. So often it's the content that we remember is the stories, and I like that. So keep them simple, have something unexpected. We like those twists and turns within our stories. Concrete, and to me that's a lot about the structure, and that you can follow the structure. Credible, we notice if it's too outlandish out there. We're pretty active in our story analysis, even if we don't realize it, that we pretty quickly will tune out if it's too incredible, and we don't buy it. We'll disengage. Emotional, as Elaine said, that's a huge part, and that's really the way that we connect. First, it's really through stories that the emotional part comes out, and that thereafter we're able to then engage intellectually with the ideas. So a lot of thought around there. I think I'm just gonna leave it at that for now. You guys, hope you're having a great week. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast, rate and review. There's ways to rate and review on iTunes, and I also want to invite you to, for those of you that want to dive deep into more intellectual discussions, as I've mentioned before, I'm running as a co-host to another podcast called 73 Mentors. And there's also be a link for that in the notes. And in that, we're discussing the 73 most influential people who have ever lived. So far, my brother and I, he's the other co-host, we have dove deep into Plato, spent about 15 hours talking about Plato. Now, that's broken up into episodes. You don't have to listen to all at once. And we are on the verge of releasing our first episode on Galileo. And we'll continue to dive into the most influential people in the world who have ever lived, and in a lot of ways create the world that we have today. You guys have a great week out there, like I said, and take that next step wherever you're at in your life and your journey, and in your storytelling, story creation. I hope you found something here that you can, even if it's a small thing, to adapt. And maybe the thing is just to write a little bit more, create a little bit more story in the weeks to come. All right, we'll catch you guys in in a few weeks. Take care.
Thank you for sharing with us at StoryHinge. We hope this time together has added more goodness to your journey. Until next time, onward and upward, and may your own story continue to grow more beautiful.